right, we're going live. This is our 7th episode. Oh no! Doggy interference here. This is our 7th episode of... Oh my god, we're all turned around here. Oh, I don't... What just happened?
I don't know.
Is it still live? Yeah. Okay. We lost the comment section though. Where's that? Where'd that go? Well...
What if someone comments this time?
I know. What if someone comments Okay. Okay, anyway. Sorry. So, we're live here with our 7th episode of Resistance Resistance Reads. Now I'm all discombobulated.
It's all Ruby's fault.
All right, anyway. It's Sinclair Lewis's 1935 book. It Can't Happen Here.
Yes.
And it, just kind of in summary here, real quick, is that it does kind of fit well with our discussions of V for Vendetta in 1984, our first 2 episodes.
Feels like a triptych of those.
It does. But it's focused on the United States, and it's definitely very much a cautionary tale about the rise of fascism.
Yeah.
He started writing this, Sinclair Lewis, in 1934, published it in 1935. A lot of people say that he's essentially pointing out like Huey Long. That's essentially the kind of person he's modeling. Basilius Wintrip or Buzz Wintrip, who ultimately becomes the dictator. Very quickly in the novel, he becomes the dictator because the whole focus is like it can happen here.
Absolutely. The fact that Huey Long died while he was writing it, I think allowed him to name check Huey Long in the book,
Yeah.
But I think it would have been a lot more like a Citizen Kane situation if Huey Long hadn't died. It would have. I'm sure he would have been putting pressure on him to not publish this book.
And so there's this point in this book where, right in the beginning, where Wintrip talks about, I'm going to offer everybody $5,000 a year. Which, if I looked it up and
it's like $120,000 a year.
It's a 6-figure income.
It's crazy.
It's UBI.
Well, it's UBI, but it's like wildly unrealistic UBI. If we were actually doing UBI, I think it would be way closer to like
30,000.
30 to 50,000. Yeah, exactly. Like enough to live on, enough to subsidize yourself so you don't have to work full time.
Right.
But not like not like that's like twice my salary. That's a crazy amount of money.
It is a crazy amount of money, but that actually was Huey Long's policy. The $5,000 was what Huey Long said. And I was reading a little bit about the historical notes, and they were saying Huey Long actually stood a pretty decent chance of winning the presidency. So he was assassinated, though, actually on the Capitol steps in Washington. So
wild.
Yeah, super wild. So obviously that never came to pass. But this is what Sinclair Lewis is writing about. In some ways, his work is extremely prescient. And in a lot of ways, this book feels like a post-war book, a post-Second World War, not a post-First World War book.
It feels like, I was saying this before we got on, but it feels like a rough draft for 1984.
It does in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So the book is really surrounding the Jessup family, specifically a guy by the name of Doremus Jessup and his children. He's got a couple of children. He has
three
children. He has Mary, he has Sissy, or Cecilia is her name, but everyone calls her Sissy.
I think it's really funny later in the novel, someone calls her Cecilia and she's just like, what? That might be my name. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then his very disappointing son, Douglas.
Yeah.
Who's just a fucking...
Wasn't Douglas.
Or Douglas or Preston.
Was it?
Douglas Preston. Something like that.
We like Douglas Preston.
It was but it was a real white boy name.
Yeah.
No, Douglas Preston.
Preston or Prescott. Why is it? Well, he's so little in the book.
He shows up so little and he's so disappointing every single time he does show up.
He's a capitulator.
Yeah.
So he's the one who's like, Dad, why don't you just give in to the new regime? I don't understand it. And
Absolutely.
he starts out as a lawyer for the new regime, then becomes a judge for the new regime. So we got those people. We also have what was his name? His like worker friend. His worker. He hires this guy to like do yard work and stuff around for him.
Oh yeah.
Chad Ledoux.
Chad Ledoux.
Chad Ledoux. And Chad Ledoux's kind of a screw up, and he kind of like thinks about before everything happens. Like he constantly is thinking like, man, I should fire this guy, and his friends are like, you should fire this guy.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I'm just trying to give him a chance, and he's kind of interesting.
He's just like a terrible disgruntled worker.
He's a terrible disgruntled worker, and he actually becomes like a major player in the regime.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like this interesting, the down and out, worthless kind of worker, the forgotten man, which is also part of how you get the rise of the regime is the League of Forgotten Men, which is kind of it's
the Tea Party plus MAGA.
Well, it is, and it's also led by this preacher.
Yeah.
And what was the preacher's name?
It's not Father Coughlin.
It's not Father Coughlin. It's supposed to be an approximation of Father Coughlin.
Yeah, but not Catholic. That's why
but not Catholic. Yeah.
That's why he rises so far and then falls so far so precipitously.
Yeah. So we have a couple of themes going on here. We've got like an evangelical movement that's building right at the beginning of the book. We got Basilius Winthrop, who essentially very quickly takes over the Democratic Party to the point where FDR, like having just finished his first presidential term, right?
No, it's
because he take in 1930.
Oh yeah. He takes over in 30. So he's done like 1.5. I think he takes a half term from.
That's right. He takes the half term
from Hoover or no. Who's the president before FDR? The guy who had the Teapot Dome scandal and all that bullshit. It's like it's a short presidency.
Yeah, and he takes over.
Yeah.
So FDR
doesn't get a re-election.
Right, he doesn't get the re-election. He tries to actually start a new party, a Jeffersonian party, and then is also running against the Republican Party, Trowbridge.
Yeah.
What was Trowbridge's first? I don't know.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't. There's a lot of names, and actually it's one of my big critiques of the book, is he does a lot of name dropping, that some are very clearly name dropping from like modern stuff, like stuff in the 1920s and 30s. In fact, I also read that a lot of the journalists, he put them in the concentration camps later. Like he actually mentioned the journalists and stuff, their names as a way of honoring his colleagues and stuff.
Yeah, he name checks a lot of contemporary people, and then he also makes up a lot of like straw men, basically.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. I think it's like he might not have realized that this was going to be confusing for people later on. People reading 100 years on, which is basically what we're doing right now. This book was written like 80, 90 years ago. And it just doesn't, like, you don't know who's supposed to be a send-up and who's supposed to be a real person.
Right.
And I think you would have to do, like, a lot of, like, research while reading it to get all of the references.
And it's one of the reasons I think, so Sinclair Lewis was the first American to win a Nobel Prize for literature.
Yeah.
So he's the first one, and then so I was like, well, why did he disappear? And some of his critics essentially say, well, the reason was too much 20s and 30s specific terminology and name dropping. Yeah. So it doesn't kind of, like when we're reading Grapes of Wrath, Grapes of Wrath transcends time because we know it's a story about poverty and surviving struggle.
1984 is the same way.
1984 is the same way, right? You know? So we can kind of apply these things to the far future.
The pseudo, it's like semi-fictionalized stuff is like really not, it's not easily accessible. I think that was
right.
I think
And there's a couple of points in the beginning where like he just lists things. There was a lot of lists in the beginning.
Yeah.
So the book ultimately ends up good, but like the first couple of chapters was like, where are you going with
Absolutely. This? I think it's the one I have the most like mixed feelings about because this is another point I made when we were talking before we got on here, that it feels like it feels really regionally specific in good ways and bad ways, and I think it's like, how do you make a Vermont radical, and what is a Vermont radical? And they're basically just like a milquetoast liberal. If you're being radical in Vermont, you're like you're still like doing half measures, and it's very frustrating given everything that the protagonist goes through, that he basically ends up just being like, I think we need a third way, like, what about a middle road, like, what if we like, instead of like overthrowing the system that was so clearly flawed that it was like someone was able to take it over with almost no effort, what if we just like are insurrectionists for the Republican candidate, like it's fucking bullshit, man.
Yeah. All right, so let's do a quick summary here.
Yeah.
So it starts kind of with this local Rotary Club meeting, and it's just kind of like, basically you're getting kind of a preview for the kinds of conversations that are happening. This general is invited to speak, and this conservative woman speaks, and then anytime anyone tries to object, they're kind of like shouted down and ignored, and it's kind of like this uneasy kind of feeling like, well, why doesn't she get to ask questions sort of thing, right? And then like he kind of goes through this list of all the terrible conditions. Like, we're now 7 years into the Great Depression at this point. And so he makes these long lists of gripes that Americans kind of have, which were very realistic for the time. Like, he's probably just like literally citing basically news headlines of things that are happening.
That's how I took it. Absolutely.
Then there's this kind of movement to reinstall a military fervor in young men, because young men have kind of lost their way, and young men are feeling like demasculated, which obviously has
throughout the book they keep on saying, what if we need a dictator to make us strong again?
To make us strong again, right? You gotta make us go back to the good old days.
Exactly.
Make America great again.
Wow. Yeah, exactly.
And then there's occasion, as you're starting to read this book, there's a mention of a book written not by Wintrip, but by his kind of like right-hand man, Saracen, called 0 Hour. And it kind of, to me, felt like, at first it was just kind of like some political stuff, but then all of a sudden you start getting like blaming the Jews.
It gets Mein Kampfy really
And I
fast.
actually was like, this is definitely like, a tip of the cap.
It feels actually, what if The Art of the Deal plus Mein Kampf?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Because he's got a lot of like, this is how I, like do a business deal. This is how I like get my politics done.
Right.
Very, very Art of the Deal style.
Very folksy too.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, what if The Art of the Deal plus Mein Kampf written by Mark Twain? That's how 0 Hour hits when you're reading the excerpts of it.
And they actually, in a lot of the beginning of the chapter, not every chapter, but quite a few chapters, has an excerpt right in the beginning. Like, I'm sure it's like an epigraph at the top of each chapter, and it's like this passage from 0 Hour. So you're kind of getting the thinking of Wintrip as you're going along, because he's really not in the book very much.
He's not. That's actually a really good point. Your main exposure to him is through the book that he didn't even write.
Right.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Because he is being puppeted the whole time.
Yeah. So then, you start to see these kinds of conversations by, these evangelical preachers. They actually mention some really interesting characters, like real evangelical preachers. They mention Father Coughlin. They mention Father Divine. And Father Divine was kind of like this precursor to the civil rights, but he was also kind of a grifter too.
Yeah.
So, he's kind of like, taking people's like old ladies' money. He convinced his followers to buy him a hotel, all this kind of crazy stuff, like this multi-$100,000 hotel.
That's crazy.
So, you're seeing a kind of like these Joel Osteen kind of characters.
Yeah.
Very much around.
Yeah.
And, it also ties into like the strength of fascism using the radio. Like, whenever we get that new kind of medium becoming, taken over by a group of authoritarian figure, right? So nowadays we have social media, and we see a huge rise of fascism across social media.
Yeah.
Sinclair Lewis is obviously highlighting what was going on in the 1930s with the rise of these kinds of Rush Limbaugh kind of characters.
I was just gonna say, man, that's how Rush Limbaugh came up, and he was really instrumental in getting Newt Gingrich and his pals elected in the early 90s.
Yep, for sure. He then go over they give a long detailed 12. There's a whole chapter. All of chapter 8 is dedicated to Wintrip's 12-point or 15-point approach. Sorry, 15-point approach to what he is going to do when he gets into office.
It hits like Project 2025. So
it does
fully, man. It's beat for beat almost.
Yeah. And actually, another thing I found was that people from Project 2025 actually took lessons from this.
Of course they did.
This is like one of their many guidebooks. So they actually took lessons from this novel. So the last there's a lot of stuff going on with those 12 points. So he spends first a chapter giving you the 12 points, and then he's a chapter well,
it's a 15-point plan, and it's basically like subjugating these people, giving people kickbacks, maybe but also it's like all of the points counteract the other points. They're all just like this is an outreach for the black people, which they don't say black people.
Yeah.
This is the outreach for the poor people. This is how we oppress the Jews. Mm-hmm. And all of these points are not they're negotiable, except the last point
15,
which is executive fiat.
Yeah, essentially imperial presidency.
Yeah.
That Congress will only function and the Supreme Court will only function. They're basically overturning judicial review.
Yep.
And essentially that Congress cannot resist the power of the executive. So
yeah.
it's the ultimate imperial presidency.
Yeah, exactly.
If you don't know what the imperial presidency, look up Nixon's imperial presidency. There's a whole history behind that kind of idea.
But it's like making it very explicit and
checks and balances gone.
Get rid of that red tape. Yeah.
All checks and balances gone.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about later why that basically has happened anyway.
Yeah.
But and then he starts assembling so he gets the Democratic nomination over FDR. Mm-hmm. FDR splits off, starts a Jeffersonian party because he says he absolutely cannot support Wintrip. He can't get behind him.
Yep.
So as soon as he has the candidacy for the Democratic Party nailed, he starts a group called the Minutemen.
Yeah, it's a marching club.
With
blackjacks.
Yes. And you kind of get the sense very quickly that these are basically the SS.
Oh yeah.
Very quickly.
It's like the KKK dressed like the SS.
Right. So, and then and so then of course he wins the presidency. And his first act is to arm the Minutemen.
Yep.
And all in one day, he basically arms and expands the Minutemen, and then he says to Congress, "Be prepared to step down."
Yep.
Essentially, and they refuse. The Congress actually total 100% bipartisan, F you kind of deal.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, really?" And sends the Minutemen in and rips them out of, basically takes them.
Yeah.
And then same thing with the court, and then replaces them all with people favorable to him. And you get the beginning of the kind of fascist, authoritarian kind of state.
And I think one Supreme Court member is assassinated. Several of them step down because they're liberals and they're just no, this is fucked up. But he's doing assassinations the whole time.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, for sure. And you do get a sense later that he's more of the puppet.
Yeah.
And it's the other people behind the scenes. But Doremus then, of course, is I don't know. I mean, he kind of calls it long before.
The whole time he's writing editorials because he's the editor of the local newspaper in his town.
Right.
He's writing editorials mildly criticizing this, but basically just kind of being guys, do we think this is great? He's not taking a strong line against the rise of Wintrip, and you get the impression that in every town there's a dude like him who's skeptical, but not like not going to the mattresses,
Right.
not fighting this. And then when shit goes down, it's so fast, you
Yeah,
know. And
it's
he's like,
fast. It's bombarded.
wow,
Right.
you know.
Right.
And it's really like, I feel like with well, what's the protagonist's name again? It's wild.
Doremus.
Yeah.
Doremus Jessup.
Doremus Jessup really reminds me of the father of the female protagonist in Zorro, who's just like this like intellectual, like who just longs to live in his ivory tower. I didn't even realize that the ivory tower was a poem.
Mm-hmm.
That like that's where we get that phrase from.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Just longs to live in his ivory tower and like
and
be an intellectual
right.
and be a gentleman, but like not actually contribute anything to society because you're just like you're basically just like pulling knowledge out of it and like hoarding it for yourself and not really sharing it in any meaningful way because you're just writing these editorials that nobody fucking cares about. And
right.
you know, yeah, he just like the main character made me mad a lot of the time in this book.
Yeah. Yeah, and he kind of like he gets all depressed because he doesn't like this guy and he sees things going on, so he kind of just retreats to reading literature and then like stuff starts to happen, and like so Chad Ledoux gets to be basically like a commander of the local Minutemen regiment. The Minutemen in the first 6 months increased to a size of 500,000.
Yeah.
So you
crazy.
have an army of 500,000 of like totally loyal soldiers to Buzz.
It's a domestic occupation.
It is very much. And so you have a very quick kind of rise of this. Another couple of things he does that's super important very early is he eliminates states.
I thought that was crazy, man.
Yeah, he makes 8 districts.
Provinces?
Or regions.
I think they're literally called provinces.
Yeah.
And I'm like, really? We're just gonna do the Canada thing? Like, that's wild.
Well, and I think it is a way of like
it's like
disabusing of state power.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So the separation of powers between state and the Fed. This kind of knocks that on its ass because suddenly
and takes
there's no states.
An element of identity away from people as well.
Right. Yeah, because you know, like I mean, think about how like how into Texas people are.
Oh, dude, I'm sorry.
Or Colorado. Even.
Well, I was gonna say if Colorado went away and it was just like we were the same state as like Wyoming and Kansas, I would be fucking mad about it. You know?
Yeah.
You would constantly see me flying my Colorado flag.
Yeah.
You know, I would get another Colorado flag tattooed on me. I already have one.
And then
a more visible one is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So he's renegotiating the identity and giving people this sense of like a liminal state where their identity has to be renegotiated in addition to the political ideology being renegotiated, in additional kind of the economy being renegotiated because suddenly like the money of course doesn't show up.
The money just never shows up.
And then the other thing he does is he divides work into 6 class systems. And I forget exactly what they all but
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't really matter. But 6 class systems. So he's essentially instituting a full-on caste system as well.
Absolutely. Because caste systems are a great way to reinforce power.
Yeah, absolutely they are. And
that's why we have racism in our country.
Yep. I mean they used racism to create the caste system.
That's what I'm saying.
And then I mean, there's all kinds of other things that he's kind of doing to kind of upend this sense. You know, of course, he begins building concentration camps. And this is one of those moments where I was like, is this a post-World War II book? Or what is this? But then I looked into the history and the first concentration camps, and I knew of the Boer camps for the British in the early 20th century.
In like the aughts?
Yeah. I mean, we tend to think of like the Nazis as like this really terrible thing, but the British were so bad.
The British?
So bad.
The English are... I can't remember who said it, and I might have quoted this on this podcast before, but like, if it weren't for the Nazis, the English would be history's greatest monsters.
Yeah.
Just because they came up with like the country house mystery and like did a pretty good job with rock and roll in the 60s, I feel like they get a pass, you know, from us. But like, if it weren't for those two things, oh my God,
They're
the
awful.
atrocities.
Yeah,
The atrocities.
Zulu massacre, the Boer
In,
Wars,
on
all
every
the stuff in
continent,
India.
man. Like,
yeah, I mean, it
well,
is unbelievable.
not Antarctica, I suppose, but like,
But
we don't know. We don't know what they did on Antarctica.
That's why it's unpopular.
There's nobody there now. What did they do?
But the British were the second to have concentration camps. The first were the Spanish, who did it to the Cubans during this 10 years war in the 1880s, 1890s. And that is and you can look at the pictures. I mean, they look like people coming out of the Jewish Holocaust.
Yeah, it's fucked up, man.
So it is. So concentration camps are not a new thing. I didn't realize how prevalent they were. I mean, I had known about the Boer camps, but I didn't know they were officially called concentration camps.
Yeah,
they were. So the British I mean, also, by the way, like Adolf Hitler was taking notes from the British and from the Americans' treatment of the indigenous people.
Absolutely.
And the eugenics movement, which is an American-specific movement, by the way. So,
absolutely.
And then, which is kind of what Sinclair Lewis is
I think
hinting about.
Really pointing out.
He's pointing out that a lot of this stuff that Adolf Hitler, and I do think in part maybe his project in this book is to make people aware of who Hitler is, because Americans in 1935, Americans are.
He was Times Man of the Year, not Man's Time of the Year. He was Times Man of the Year. Like, I think the year this came out in 35,
was it
right?
35?
It was in the mid 30s.
It was in the mid 30s,
and it was before.
It was before the invasion of Poland.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but either way, like...
Anyway, from 33 to 35, he's very popular in the United States.
Right. I mean, the Madison Square Garden... And
Mussolini's popular as well with the British and with the Americans, too.
Yeah, there's a 20,000 sold-out tickets to Madison Square Garden.
In 38!
In 38.
Yeah.
For the Nazi Party and in support of Hitler. So, like...
In the German-American Bund.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And he references the Bund at one point.
Yeah.
So, things are going from bad to worse. What really makes Doremus finally sit up and start doing something is that the pair of one's Jewish, one's not, researchers at a university that he was kind of friends with are just killed. Brutally murdered by Chad Ledoux and his buddies. And they let him off.
Yeah.
Basically, that they come up with some charge about how these two Jewish fellows, and one of them's not even Jewish.
Yeah.
Basically, we're trying to do some sort of ritual murder against Chad and his friends.
Yeah.
And so,
they did the blood. They just call it the blood libel.
The blood libel, right? Which is the Jewish. I mean, almost every conspiracy theory is anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
But
yes, that's true.
Yeah, they're most of them are anti-Semitic, right?
Yeah.
They really come all the way back from the Italian Renaissance.
Absolutely.
So anyway, so this makes Doremus finally sit up and I gotta say something. So he pens an article. This is bullshit. This is not how it really happened.
Mm.
It was the Minutemen who killed and murdered two innocent people.
Yeah.
He prints this thing and it causes a freaking riot in the streets when it finally goes out.
Yeah.
He debates all night of whether or not he should print it, and he talks to
his wife. She's like, don't do it. Talks to his girlfriend. She's like, definitely do it.
Yeah. He does have a little side honey.
Yeah.
And she's like a bar. She
owns a tavern.
She's a co-owner of a bar.
Room, yeah.
Yeah, and a tea room, and the tea room's much later, but
it's a tea room in a tavern.
Is it?
Yeah, so the tavern situation is it's a hostelry with a bar and a separate. In England they call them coffee rooms.
Okay.
But over here we call them tea rooms, which is weird because we like coffee and they like tea. Don't ask me. But she runs the tea room part of that. She's got a partner that runs the tavern side of it, and he basically, as soon as she starts doing anything, the party gives her part of the business to her partner.
Yeah, that she's based, because women need to go back to the kitchen. That's one of the points.
Exactly, and I've got a quote about that. Lindy was tipping donuts into a deep fryer, a picture out of an old romantic days, which Buzz Windrop was trying to restore, when a female who had brought up 11 children and been midwife to dozens of cows was regarded as too fragile to vote.
Yeah. So anyway, so he's basically going. so then of course, you know, the local power people, like including Chad, show up and then he gets arrested. He gets put before a judge, and
This guy's the sickest fuck in the book.
yeah, he is. And the judge is, I mean, he perpetrates all kinds of terrible things. And he tells him, you know, like, you're going to be a good little boy and you're going to continue to write for your paper.
Mhm.
But now this other guy is going to come and take it over.
Yeah.
And you're going to mentor him and you're going to be a good little boy and tell the right stories to the party and you're not going to cause any other trouble, or else we will send you the firing squad. And at the same time, his son-in-law busts in and is like, you are not messing with my father-in-law. And his son-in-law is a doctor, right? And he kind of thinks his position's more safe because, like, regardless of what the regime is doing, they need doctors.
Yeah.
Like, so he's a high-status person in the regime, and, you know, he's got his Hippocratic oath, so he helps everybody.
Yeah.
So he busts in, he says, you will not do this. And right there, he's like, take him out back and shoot him.
Yes.
And so Doremus watches his son-in-law dragged out, and he says the only thing he hears is one single shot, a cry of agony, and then dead silence.
Yeah.
And that's really where Doremus is like, okay, I've got to figure out how to do something. He kind of enlists his entire family, with the exception of his wife. His wife is very much like the stand-in for the 30s, kind of like typical homemaker in a lot of ways.
His wife gives me strong trad wife vibes.
Yep, very much.
She doesn't want to think about anything. Everybody knows that he's having an affair. And it's really funny because there's a scene at the beginning where he and his girlfriend, Lindy, are like talking about it. And they're like, no way. Like, you're just like this bespectacled, like, professor type. And I'm like a local, like, you know, feminist agitator. No one would ever think that we would be together. But literally, like, everybody knows.
Yeah.
And
even his daughter.
His
His 18-year-old daughter is like, Dad, you
should just be with
her. Your mom sucks.
It's
like
so
it's really funny. So
it's a very funny conversation. His daughters are the best part of the book.
Yeah. His daughters are both Mary.
Mary,
amazing.
Mary.
Yeah. She's like my favorite character.
Same.
She's such a badass.
Same.
So,
she's just mad the whole time.
And Mary's the one who's who's Mary the doctor. She kind of after so
she gets radicalized.
She gets radicalized big time.
Yeah.
There's this great quote in chapter 20. So this is after everything is like. So he's now really trying to figure out some way that he can assist in resistance.
Yeah.
And he says, the quote was, "Under tyranny, most friends are a liability."
I love that part.
And it's
a quarter will like pretend to help you, a quarter will outright turn on you, and another quarter will be like the ones that
that keep you going.
Keep you going. Yeah.
And his friend Buck also becomes a part of this.
Buck rules too, man.
They manage to Doremus goes along for a little while. Ultimately, he kind of convinces like a superior of his now basically overseer is Chad, right?
Yeah.
But then he convinces the guy just above Chad to let him retire. And so for a little while he's kind of wandering around trying to figure out how he can resist. And then his friend and Buck, they steal an old printing press from the basement of his
like it's like piece by piece over like the course of a month. It's so fucking cool.
Right.
Yeah.
So they steal this and they start printing out like what kind of stuff is really going on.
He gets approached by like the Communist Party, and then he gets approached by the New Underground, which they call New, NU, and that guy is so cool because he's like just like kind of spying around, like looking for people who are likely going to be sympathetic. And it's like the riskiest fucking job you can have. I feel like it's just like approaching random people and being like, "Do you want to like try to overthrow this regime?" You know,
but they're all under all those guys are insurance salesmen.
They're insurance salesmen, which is so funny.
Which is really funny.
Yeah.
So you know he starts kind of getting plugged into the network. He starts printing stuff, and then of course he does ultimately get caught, and gets thrown into a concentration camp.
Yeah.
In the meantime, by the way, his daughter Sissy is kind of like in love with this guy Julian, and Julian kind of ultimately decides to enlist in the MMs, the Minutemen, to become a spy.
He does a pretty good job for like 6 months or so.
He does a pretty good job for a while,
Yeah.
but he does eventually get caught too.
And his treatment is so much more brutal than everybody else's. Like,
Yeah.
since he's like a specific traitor to the party,
Right.
they like put him on display. You know,
Yeah.
like and he gets like daily beatings and all that shit. It's
Well, and
really
Doremus gets it pretty bad too. They whip him with a steel cable.
And a fishing rod.
Yeah, it's a fishing line. It's like a steel fishing line.
Oh, okay.
So it's like this extra higher gauge fishing line. That's not like a.
Oh, of course, because it's like fucking Vermont, and there's like
commercials.
Yeah, right.
So
Oh, that makes sense.
And
okay.
they're whipping him like sometimes 40 or 50 lashes a day, and then they also force him to drink castor oil, which, if you don't know, is a extreme laxative.
I did not get what that
when
was.
They're forcing down castor oil,
so you can't like.
So he can't even hold anything in. Basically, he's evacuating everything, and then on top of it, he's being beaten on a daily basis. So Doremus really gets.
Yeah, I mean, he gets it for like a couple weeks.
Yeah.
You know, but like Julian gets it like continuously the whole time.
Yeah. So then, of course, they're all trying to, they're talking about life in the concentration camp for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day, something kind of strange happens. Chad shows up.
Yeah,
in
dude.
the camp. So the Chad Ledoux, the guy who was like this commander of the Minutemen, shows up. And it turns out his daughter, Sissy, had been kind of like spying. And you kind of knew this before. But finally, she like... When Chad proposes Chad proposes marriage because he's like in love with her or whatever.
He's been in love with her for like probably her whole life.
Yeah, probably her whole life. I mean, a little bit creepy because he's like way older.
He's like 15, 20 years older.
Yeah. So he's obviously falling around like versus she was like 12. He's like making eyes at her and stuff, right? So kind of a creep.
Yeah, he's a fuck.
So anyway, so Chad gets thrown in there because it turns out that Sissy discovered that he's actually been skimming off the top of the regime and trying to make himself a millionaire because they're not even paying the Minutemen.
No.
So
they did start paying the Minutemen eventually,
but very, very little.
No, it was actually like they were getting more than the army. Is that right? Like it took a while, but like a year into it, they start getting paid. And it's pretty substantial because she's like, how could you marry me on your officer's salary? It's like, not enough. And he's like, I'm not going to be like this level officer forever. I've got this plan and I'm going to be a millionaire within a year. And then he tells her his scam, which is not just skimming off the top, but it's like setting up side operations with guys he's supposed to be extorting. He's like, the Minutemen are supposed to just be extorting local businesses. But what he's doing is like getting contracts from suppliers and then just like pocketing all of that revenue. It's wild, and the fact that he tells anybody about it just means he's fucking stupid.
Yeah, and Doremus is like probably the reason he actually got in trouble is not that he was doing the skimming, it's that his superiors were not getting their cut.
That's exactly right. I have to assume that's exactly right.
So anyway, so he gets in there and of course he gets straight up murdered.
It's so brutal.
They basically make a Molotov cocktail
out of shit.
Yeah, out of shit, and then they light him on fire and they throw it on him and he burns to death or whatever.
Because they've taken over this like girls' school and in
college. It was part of a college.
Yeah, part of a college, and they just used like fucking plywood to section off little portions of the dormitories for everybody to stay. So that shit goes up like it's Tinder, it's just like and he burns to death in like a minute and a half.
Well,
and it's like one of the most satisfying like executions I've ever read.
And Doremus is like, he opposes having Chad murdered.
He's the one who opposes it.
And and like actually what ends up happening after is like they bring in a new, much more brutal guy to like basically torture the hell out of everyone to try to get someone to confess.
The captain of the concentration camp was kind of just like, it's weird to see like wasn't that bad because
he was more passive. He didn't really like the beatings.
Yeah, he didn't like his job, and so he was doing a bad job of it, which is kind of like the best you could hope for in a concentration camp situation.
If you're gonna be a prisoner in a situation where you have no rights, like having a passive guy is probably your ideal.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he gets thrown in there, and then you get the story about Mary.
Dude,
so
Mary.
so
She becomes the local leader of the rebellion after everybody gets like all the dudes get thrown in the concentration camp.
Yep, and then she decides to become a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
So she becomes a pilot because they apparently have no qualms with recruiting women for the military.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a little strange.
Well, so it seemed to me like what she was doing was she wasn't actually joining the military. She was cozying up because, you know, Doremus's daughters are pretty. They're like, you know, like healthy Vermont, you know, outdoorsy types. And so she cozies up to one of the captains of the like flying academy. And she's like, I want to learn how to fly too, just in case you guys ever need help. And he's like, I think he's just like, this is a way for me to get close to this lady. So he's like, yeah, I'll teach you how to fly.
Yeah.
And then one day when she's like having a lesson, she smuggled 3 hand grenades and like pops the cabin open and just starts dropping them on the judge who like had her husband assassinated and like tried her father.
Yeah.
She's like dropping them on his plane because he's like going somewhere and she figures it out.
Yeah.
And they don't work. You know, she's like, it's really hard to drop a bomb accurately on a moving target. Mm-hmm. So she's like, oh, well, I guess I just gotta fly this plane into this dude.
Yeah, and he at this point had like that judge had become like a regional administrator.
Absolutely,
so
he was on the way up for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
So she just is like whatever, and she actually does like get her parachute out. She's gonna jump out, but it's too late.
The timing doesn't work out.
The timing doesn't work out.
They give her a military funeral because they're like, oh, it was a fucking accident. You know?
Right.
Because they can't print that like
that it was an assassination.
Yeah, exactly.
But it absolutely was. And then, so from there, things kind of start to get strange. Like in the concentration camp, they notice they're isolating them more, and they're like, something must be going on in the outside. And in fact, it kind of is.
Oh, yeah.
So Saracen actually deposes Wintrip pretty quick.
Yeah.
And so this
within 2 years.
Yeah, within 2 years. He deposes him, and then, you know, he's going to kill Wintrip, but then Wintrip is like, well, you know,
we were homies.
When we were homies, and I helped you when your family member was sick, and remember I hitchhiked so that I gave you the money so you could go see your sick family member. And he's like, all right, we'll exile you. So they send him to Paris. It turns out Wintrip has been like also skimming.
So the thing that Saracen accuses him of, like the reason that he's deposing him, he says is because he was extorting, like he was skimming money off of the coffers for the public. That actually was true.
Yeah,
dude had millions of dollars stashed overseas.
So he ends up going and lives, and this is the thing that just like pisses you off.
So
he ends up going and living in exile in Paris as a multi-millionaire.
Yeah,
you're just like, really?
That's and the tragedy, as far as he's concerned, is that nobody knows who he is.
Yeah, yeah.
Fuck.
Every once in a while, an American shows up in Paris and tries to kill him, but he kind of escapes.
6 times. It happens 6 times.
Yeah. So then Saracen is like, actually, I thought he was queer. If that was
absolutely, correct. He's definitely gay, definitely
and like having young boys over and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. He institutes all of his favorite fucks, I guess, and in like different cabinet positions, and they're all like fresh-faced, like cherubic 25-year-olds who are like, you know, Secretary of State and like, you know, Secretary of the Treasury and shit like that. And it's like, but he only lasts like 2 months because he gets bumped off really quick because he's basically just having orgies in the White House and writing like pop songs for the like
Hike is the guy who could Hike
General Hike.
General Hike. So General Hike is kind of, and that he's actually the one in the very, very, very beginning.
Yeah,
that is like at the Rotary Club, and he's kind of he's not like a Christian. He actually says he's not a Christian, but he's a Puritan.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
So he freaks out about this whole thing that's going on in the White House, kills him, and then he ends up being actually super brutal.
Super brutal, and goes to war with Mexico.
Tries to go to war with Mexico.
I think they do. I mean, it just doesn't go well.
They start ramping things up, and that's when the rebellion nationwide starts kicking.
It's a nationwide rebellion, but I get the impression at the end of the book they're still trying to fight a ground war in Mexico, which is like stupid.
Yeah,
the stupid idea.
Right. So, but the Midwest starts rebelling, and then Texas follows, and California follows, and so the book
basically like the Mountain West over just like decides they're not fucking having this anymore.
While this is all happening, it turns out that, and we forgot to mention this point, that Trowbridge actually had fled to Canada much earlier in the book.
The Republican candidate.
Republican candidate.
Yeah.
He basically is beginning the rebellion, right?
Yeah, he starts the new underground.
The new underground. Yeah. And then, so in the midst of all this, the deposition of Winthrop and Saracen, and then Hike, all of that stuff's going on. Doremus manages with his friends. One of his friends helps him escape. His girlfriend helps him escape.
His girlfriend rules.
Yeah,
Lindy's the shit.
His girlfriend, Lindy's awesome.
Yeah,
and she gets him out, and she gets him to Canada, and he's like super bored. He's like, "Hey, send me back down. I want to do something."
It's so funny. The description of his life in Canada is like he's just up there hanging out with all the other exiles because like Canadians are like fucking sick of like American refugees coming over with like a bunch of entitlement and no money.
Yeah.
And you're just like wanting to like tell Canadians about how bad it is down there, even though they're the ones who like let this shit happen.
Right.
So Canadians have no sympathy for them. They don't really want to socialize with any of the American refugees. So they're just sitting around in cafes all day, like just being bored as shit.
Right.
It's really funny. And so then Trowbridge eventually approaches him and he's like, "Hey, do you want to like go do some spy work?"
Well, because it feels like at first like it's gonna go extremely well, and sorry, I'm trying to see if we have comments too.
Oh yeah.
So it feels like the rebellion's gonna go extremely well, and that basically they're gonna overthrow things. But Hike is a general and an experienced one,
he knows
and
what he's
ultimately like stops the rebellion from happening.
Well, I don't know if he does. It feels like he kind of like stalls it. Exactly right. Yeah.
So
they're in kind of a détente.
So they send Doremus down to be a spy essentially and start to try to figure out. So the book kind of ends with Doremus like very happily kind of waltzing around the countryside, like building connections, and now he is an insurance salesman.
Yeah, he's an insurance salesman. He's got 60 men under him.
Yeah, and Sinclair Lewis like basically ends it as like there will always be a man like Doremus.
Yeah, Doremus gets to be Tom Joad, which is I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Yeah. So,
it feels like Sinclair Lewis is like sees Doremus as very much like himself, and he's like, there will always be a man like Sinclair Lewis.
Yeah,
it's like, all right, bro.
Yeah. We do have one comment.
Ah.
The wife of Doremus struck me as someone who was happiest when she didn't have the responsibility of making decisions.
Absolutely right. I think that's exactly a great read.
Yeah.
She didn't want to have to make any difficult decisions, like, and that including like confronting the fact that her husband isn't romantically interested in her anymore and hasn't been for like 10 years.
Right. They sleep in separate rooms. There is also one moment when things are starting to go south after Doremus is kind of brought before the judge and before he really starts printing his own stuff that they're going to Buck tries to help him escape to Canada.
Yeah.
But the roads are all blocked and they can't get through.
Absolutely.
And the rebellion isn't set up yet, so they can't really escape.
They don't have any like little corridors to sneak through.
And his wife is really super annoyed about this. She's like, I guess if we have to go to Canada,
right.
Like she just wants to kind of like.
She's just fine. She doesn't fucking care, man.
No, she doesn't.
She's the type of
she's
lady.
Apolitical.
She's apolitical
Super
to the point of being like, I don't know, man. It's like.
Well, she's a good example of the apathetic person who allows a regime. I mean, because look, if you look at like Hitler, for example, he only had the backing of about 33%, 34%.
That's right.
Of the electorate, right?
Yeah, he won with the plurality.
He won with a plurality, but like that was only because there were several other parties.
Sure.
But there was a whole bunch of people who also didn't participate and did nothing as he was taking his rise for power. And it's like, if you're talking about building an authoritarian regime, you need a sizable portion of people who are in favor, who are strongly and dedicated behind you.
Loudly vocal.
Loudly vocal.
Yeah.
But you also need a large portion of apathetic people who will do nothing.
Just go along to get along.
Just go along to get along.
Absolutely.
Will not pay attention to the political situation.
Yeah.
Is afraid to engage because that politics is just a hobby that other people have.
Right. And it's like, politics are so contentious. I just don't want to get into an argument. But like, the argument is like, one side is like, yeah, fascism is on the rise and we have to nip this in the bud. And the other half is like, we got to get rid of the globalists and the Jews, you know, like, and being in the middle of that and saying like, that just seems kind of argumentative and like it spoils my dinner parties is like, really, it's kind of despicable.
Yeah. And you don't have to be a person who's shouting everyone down on the streets, or you don't even have to be a person who's necessarily protesting, but there's lots of kinds of resistance.
Absolutely.
Lots and lots of different methods for pushing back. Lots of approaches to like having courageous conversations with people that are sometimes uncomfortable.
Totally.
You know, like I was reading, there was some article, I don't remember even what I was reading, but talking about how, you know, oh, my friend is constantly making racist jokes and I just really don't appreciate them, and it clearly makes everyone else uncomfortable. And it's like, your job is to sit and have a conversation with your friend about why this is inappropriate and maybe help them understand the history of this kind of stuff too, because that person is only going to listen to someone who they trust.
Well, it's like Lindy, like after Doremus publishes that first article that gets him into a lot of trouble, when he's like talking about doing it and like lets her read it, she's like, that was so inspiring. It made me want to do something. It made me want to stand up to people who are like saying awful shit. I didn't do it, but I thought about it and I wanted to do it. And then later on, she becomes like a huge asset.
Right.
Gets him out of a concentration camp through her connections. And like, I mean, it's basically her and Mary running the show when they're all locked up, you know, and Sissy as well. Yeah. But like,
Sissy becomes one hell of a rebel in her own right.
Yeah, oh my God, absolutely. They all do really important stuff. It's not flashy. It's not like, you know, like fighting in the streets or anything like that. It's just like making shit happen, like kind of
building networks.
Yeah, building networks and making shit happen in a like kind of invisible way that women do most things, you know? Right. Women in our society are like usually confined to non-public spaces, but they still have networks, you know, and they still talk to each other and make shit happen. Usually they're making way more shit happen than men are, just not in like a flashy, visible way. And that's why they're a huge asset. And Emma, Doremus's wife, is like the opposite of that. She just wants to be confined to a private sphere and not really do anything or confront anything challenging or you know, that would make her uncomfortable. And that's usually why people are apathetic, is because they don't want to be uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah. And because all this stuff is uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, so another thing, and we talked about this a little bit before, is like, despite all of this stuff happening, how kind of angry Doremus is at the communists.
Doremus is so I feel like he's very much a type of person, and I think you pointed this out earlier, he's the type of person who, or maybe this is before we were recording, who he likes capitalism, he just doesn't like, you know, like corporations and like predatory capitalism. He reminds me of Jon Stewart in a lot of ways. He likes the idea of a free market. He likes the idea of Adam Scott's like envisioning of how a market would work, and thinks that it would all be very fair if people just played fair. And that's where honor lies, or something like that.
Right.
Jon Stewart's a fucking idiot because he doesn't understand how like markets and capitalism actually work. He thinks that there's this idyllic version of it that we could get to if we just did a little bit of regulation or something like that. But you have to like keep corporations in check because they're not sentient they're like forces of nature. They're made up of a lot of different little moving parts called people who have like conflicting interests and shit like that. So if you let them go unchecked, they're just going to be avaricious and consume everything in their path like a fucking plague, or not a plague, but like the shit that came down on the Egyptians, you know,
the 10 plagues.
It's one of the plagues, but it's like the locusts. Yeah, there
locusts,
you go.
Yeah,
you know, just like a swarm of locusts, just descend on a field and strip it barren and like move on to the next thing. And people like Jon Stewart and Doremus Jessup can't really understand that.
Well, I think Sinclair Lewis too.
And Sinclair Lewis, thank you, because Doremus Jessup is obviously just Sinclair Lewis.
Obviously.
Poured it into this book. He's a fucking Mary Sue. They think that like communism is as wrong as capitalism, but the capitalism and communism are just like systems that can be corrupted by power. And so like if someone's a fanatic for capitalism or for communism, they're not thinking in like they're not thinking in like detail. They're thinking in like broad strokes. You know, they're not looking at things the way they are. They're proselytizing. They're like bought in.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not a communist. I don't think communism works. I'm a socialist, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah.
And I think that like
I would say I'm a democratic socialist.
Yeah, sure. I may be more of a socialist. I think that like you can get stuff done in community, and the larger you scale that up to like a communism level, the more
it's the problem. The problem in both cases, and this is actually
the politics. Well, I think the politics is the problem.
It's the centralization of power.
Yes, that's what it is.
In both cases. When you centralize the power, you essentially have the government control all the means of production. That leads to fascism.
Absolutely.
But also, when you have corporations are inherently fascist.
Yeah.
Because what are they? They are a monarchy by there's just another form of a monarchy.
They're a totalitarian system.
We talked about this before, I think when we were talking, I want to say maybe it was Ministry for the Future.
Sure.
We talked about how it's just you're just basically restarting feudalism over. Right?
Absolutely.
And this idea of with corporations. Yes. And so then eventually the corporations become lords or king when they're powerful enough, right? Which is what oligarchy is.
C-suite. People are always talking about the C-suite. That's the fucking aristocracy.
Right.
You know? That's like the like 6 to 10 people at the top who rule everything, and they usually answer to one person, you know, and maybe they have a board of directors, in which case it's like a parliamentary system, you know, that's a weird way to pronounce that, a parliamentary system, you know, where like people can like in a quorum weigh in on what the executive is doing,
right.
But like it's just feudalism writ large, or writ small as it were, and so Jessup is confined with like a friend of his who's like a communist, and for a while they're like buds because they're like two guys who know each other from their old neighborhood who are like cellmates, and as more and more of like the guys that they're with die, I'm assuming, you know, they kind of fall off, but we don't find out exactly what happens to them. His friend
left.
Yeah, his friend who's a communist is just driving him crazy because he's like talking about how like, man, if Moscow got word of the, you know, like if we were in Moscow right now, everything would be better. And it's like, yeah, he's just practicing religion, basically. Yeah. You know, he's just like...
These are both religions. Communism and capitalism. The irony of communism and capitalism is that they're both market-based systems, that both systems centralize power. The idea that capitalism has a free market is just like assuming that everyone is born with the same amount of capital and the same amount of power from day one.
And similar interests.
And singular, it is both systems are just variations on a similar theme about ultimately taking control of centralized power. Now, like, of course, we have like antitrust and anti-monopoly stuff as well, but that only takes you so far when, you know, money is speech.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. Like, if you have a system where like the interests of the capitalists are constrained by a non-biased like government system, which is something we kind of had for like a couple decades in the mid 20th century with like pretty strong regulatory systems to keep like the capitalist interests in check because we just had a Great Depression.
Well,
and
it
we
wasn't
kind of
only
like
that. It wasn't only that. The reason that we had such a great system in the post-war period is because communism did sound very appealing to a lot of
that's
people.
absolutely true.
So they
That's
actually
absolutely true.
constrained capitalism on purpose as a propaganda tool and made our society more socialistic to oppose communism.
There you go.
But
man.
as communism was falling apart in the really the late 70s and early 80s, and Reagan is taking power,
Yeah.
and everyone could kind of see the writing on the wall that the Soviet Union was beginning to collapse.
Yeah.
In part because of like the expenditure of military and all kinds of other elements that were going on. As soon as communism stopped being like a kind of a cry in the in like kind of parts of America.
Yeah. As soon as Red Dawn wasn't like a potential reality.
As soon as Red Dawn wasn't and Red Dawn comes so late in that anyway. It's kind of funny.
84, yeah.
Right. It's like, yeah, so it's like mid 80s, right? So as soon as that stopped being a real threat, then the capitalists realize they don't have to play this game anymore, and so we start having union busting all over again.
Yeah.
We start, kind of gutting the factories. We get more free trade agreements that essentially like offshore factories, all kinds of stuff. So the entire reason that things went so well from like the 50s to the 70s, economically speaking, is because we had another competing system that potentially threatened capitalism.
Absolutely. Also, the parties were the Republicans and the Democrats were in relatively strong agreement about like what they wanted to do, which was like reinforce racism in the country, and they agreed on that thing so they could have like polite disagreements about like how much regulation was necessary, for different different industries like telecom and mining and shit like that, and shipping. That was a major one too. And they could just like oppress minority people, not respond to the AIDS crisis or to lynchings or whatever, the non-paying of like migrant labor, all that kind of shit. So yeah,
which begins with the Bracero program, really. I mean, before that too, obviously with Chinese and various other groups, but where it's really this kind of undocumented layer that's then very clearly discarded. The first real American policies is like during the Second World War, when we didn't have enough labor, we start the Bracero program, which brings people in from Central America, largely Mexico. But which is where we get all that's where we get all the racial slurs about Mexicans and they're taking our jobs and all that stuff.
Absolutely.
That comes from the Bracero program, which was sponsored by the U.S. government to kind of fill in labor gaps where women couldn't take over because there were not enough.
There weren't enough.
So we had labor shortages with all the men fighting over the seas. The last point I want to make in this is how wonderfully Sinclair Lewis does capture the idea of the loneliness of fascism.
Oh man, absolutely.
He does a really excellent, obviously we don't agree with Sinclair Lewis on a number of points, but also he is very prescient and he does definitely highlight, things, and there's been a huge revival in this book since 2016.
Interesting.
For very, very obvious reasons. And even more so in the last few years. In fact, the reason that I picked this book is because when I was working at Starbucks, 6 months ago, one of my coworkers mentioned she was reading it in her college.
Oh, shit.
And I was like, oh, okay. And I had never read it. So I was like, man, I should give this one a read.
Yeah.
But the loneliness and isolation of these systems, and really the fact that these people who, Chad Ledoux is a great example.
Yeah.
And Chad talks about, before he dies, how lonely he is and how he really does not have it much better than when he was just a kind of a worker for this editor. Yeah. And he's just he's so isolated. He doesn't really think anyone really likes him. He doesn't get any closer to having the women and fame that he thought he was going to have as being kind of a member of this party. And then you kind of, before Wintrip gets deposed, you actually get his point of view super briefly. And he talks about
it's the one scene we see of him.
Yeah. There's kind of a little bit in the beginning, but yes.
It's the one real,
the real honest, here's a human portrayal of Wintrip.
Yes.
And he is so terribly lonely. He doesn't even want to live with his wife at his White House because he's afraid of assassination, which, fair if you're a tyrant, right? Yeah. But then also on top of that, he's hyper paranoid. He can't trust anybody. Saracen, who is just behind the scenes plotting his downfall, is basically his one friend who doesn't even want to talk to him anymore.
Yeah.
And he just talks about how sad and lonely all this stuff is. And this is the thing, like, it's so fascinating to see we've kind of a loneliness epidemic worldwide. It's not just, part of that has to do with social media, part of it has to do with the shattering of our communities because of capitalism.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of contributing factors here. Part of it is how we've convinced men and women to really hate each other too.
Absolutely.
Like we've convinced that men are convinced that women are evil, and women are convinced that men are evil, and they're both like fighting.
Women are mostly right about that, but I think
to some degree.
Well, I think that like the reason that Shad and Wintrip are both so sad and lonely, it's actually, you point that out, and it's really like an interesting like 1-2 punch. You get, I think, Chad's point of view first and then Wintrip's, but they're both thinking the same thing, which is like, I thought this power that I was pursuing was going to make me happy and not lonely anymore.
Right.
And it's actually isolated me even more, because Shad is like, you get the idea very early on that he is resentful for his position because he was born on Mount Terror, which is a place in Vermont apparently, and it's a very like rural. Yeah,
he's like 8 siblings or something.
Yeah, he's like one of 12 children, and they're very impoverished. So he's got this. He's like an odd job man who's like basically just like working for like 5 different people like a day a week, does a terrible job at all of his jobs because he's resentful of the fact that he's not a professional person, I think.
Right.
And he's not educated, and he thinks that if he had like education or power or something like that, then his life would be better. But he never pursues education and just pursues power when the opportunity presents itself. And he gets the power, but then he doesn't know what to do with it, really. And he just chases after this girl he's had a crush on for like 12 years, like since she was like a kid. It's like that whole thing's very weird, but it just goes to show, like, it illustrates like how myopic his worldview is.
And that's the manosphere.
That's absolutely the manosphere. That's where I was going with that. Exactly. It's like you get fixated on one thing that you think you want, and like 2 reasons why you don't have that thing you want. And then you just blame everything on those things, on those 2 reasons. Like, women are mean to me because I'm out of shape, and also I don't have a good enough job, And then like, and you just like, if you can't get the one thing, you'll never get the other thing, that sort of situation. Well, and then if someone comes along and it's like, hey, do you want to join up with us? We're starting this like cult, or we're starting this like paramilitary organization. You're like, yeah, absolutely, I want to do that because that's where I will feel fulfilled.
Yeah. If you guys have never seen or heard of it, and I can't remember if I mentioned it on this podcast before, the documentary film Tough Guys 2, the crisis and violent masculinity, it is a really excellent film about how we have socialized men to be violent, and that in order to gain respect, they have to be like sexually dominant and aggressive and all this other stuff. And, essentially like, they have to hate on feminism and stuff. And it just doesn't really
is to blame for everything that's
right.
Going on
and it's just,
lives.
and it's just like, it really shows you. And this came out, by the way, the first version came out right after Columbine.
Oh shit.
And then the second version, Tough Guys 2, came out right after Sandy Hook. And so he was looking for like, how do we use like gender ideology to radicalize and isolate young men so that their only path is essentially violence and dominance. And really, he's like diagnosing. I would show this all the time in my a lot of my cultural diversity classes or my classes when we're talking about gender or whatever, because I think it's important to talk about like men's issues and how young men are essentially trained to think this way. And that's like really the Minutemen are a classic example of what is doing. There was one critic of the book who said that like, well, the one thing I don't really like this whole idea of building a new world is not really present like it was with the Nazis or with Stalin or with whatever. And I was just thinking to myself, yeah, but you don't really necessarily need a new project. What you need to do is the reclamation of masculinity of the good
it's
old
funny
days,
because like
too.
the Sinclair Lewis proved to be much more prescient than that critic. I remember reading that too. And basically like that was the approach in the 20th century, but in the 21st century, all you have to do is reclaim. Actually, that's what Hitler was talking about too.
Mhm.
Now that I think about it,
Yeah, the Aryans,
the old better
Aryan order
version of Germany.
Right.
Yeah.
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 He was gonna make a 1,000-year Reich based on like old-timey practices.
Well, and what's the Reich but the Roman Empire?
Right. Exactly.
So, and I actually asked this question. I wrote it down in my notes when I was reading. I was like, do all fascists and all authoritarians really have an appeal to the past? And I cannot think of another, like, yes, they might say we want to rebuild or build something new, but ultimately they're saying we want to make America great again.
Yes.
Right?
That was Ronald Reagan's campaign slogan for his 1980 campaign.
It was. And that's not an accident that
No.
Trump kind of drew on that because he knew how popular Reagan
Plagiarized.
was. Yeah, I mean,
Plagiarized.
it was very intentional.
Yeah.
Very intentional.
Yeah.
So
I mean, Trump doesn't have ideas.
no, and in a lot of ways, he is like Wintrip because he doesn't have any values, he doesn't have any ideas, and basically it's like the Heritage Foundation kind of putting in their policies into their puppet, and
they're Saracen, absolutely.
I mean, right now they're having him just decorate the White House, and they're talking about it doing a ballroom because he's like old and feeble, and everyone doesn't like him, so like they're keeping him distracted. Like, here, do the projects you like, have a craft, so that we can continue to rule the government, because he's not going to last. I don't think. He's not going to last much longer, but
probably not.
But he's not important. That's why you're seeing this
pressure, man.
That's your. I know, right? I mean, he eats like McDonald's every single morning, right?
Seriously.
But he's not important. What's important is the regime that they're building at the moment, and that was true of Hitler as well. It wasn't Hitler was. I mean, if not,
I think both of them are important in the specific way.
They're charismatic.
The
charismatic leader is important. In the
Republican Party has tried to create another Trump so hard. And they failed every single time. Like they can't replicate it.
And Trump
the
is
closest
a rhetorical.
They've gotten is like Boebert, you know,
right? Or Sarah Palin.
Well, Sarah Palin was like a proto-Trump, actually.
Right. She was.
She was folksy and charismatic and didn't have an idea in her head, you know.
Yeah. So, but and Hitler was the same. The Nazi Party recruited Hitler. It's not the other way around.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so. So here's these people who are incredible speakers. I mean, people make fun of the things that Trump say and all that stuff, but rhetorically, he is a great orator in a lot of ways.
And Wintrip is the same way. In the book,
is the same way.
He Doremus goes to one of his rallies and is listening to him, and it's so funny. It's at Madison Square Garden, 4 years before
I know
the big
that
German
gave me
American
chills. That gave me chills.
Seriously,
I was like, wow, he even picked Madison Square Garden.
But he's getting into it. He's like, maybe this guy has some good ideas. And then as he's leaving, he's like, doesn't remember a thing he fucking said, because that's not important.
Right.
The importance was going on the ride of being soothed by.
Well, and if you were to ask, and Jordan Kepler and people like that, which I'm not a huge fan of his, but it he goes to these Trump rallies and he's talking to these people. They don't actually know what Trump says after the rally is over.
I just think guys like Jordan Kepler and Jon Stewart are so they do more harm than good because they get off on making fun of people, and that's not what we need. We can't making fun of people who are sad and lonely and are looking for something to identify with is not helpful.
It creates schismogenesis.
Absolutely.
So they double down on their identity.
Yeah.
And they say and if you don't know what schismogenesis is, it's identity through
Opposition.
Yeah. Identity through opposition.
But
so
Jon Stewart's been doing that for his whole career, and I think he's as responsible for Trump as anything else. I think he has been railing against Fox News for his whole fucking career.
Well, he made Tucker Carlson's career.
That's what I'm saying.
That's what the irony.
He thought he took him down, but he made
his career.
He made his career,
and he made him into the person he is today.
Absolutely,
he became so much more extreme.
Right?
It's that thing like we were talking about. I can't remember what episode it was now, but when someone gets embarrassed, they go hard.
They go so hard, and that's what Jordan Kepler's doing to all these poor folks at rallies. You know, like. They see themselves on YouTube in a little clip, you know, of him like dunking on them.
Angrier.
They get angry, yeah, exactly. Because it's a fucking dick move. Going around and just like taking shots at people for content is like, fuck you, man.
Well, and it's also like when an atheist wants to sit there and embarrass a Christian for their ideas. You're not going to overturn them.
Yeah.
All you're doing is trying to get off on making fun of other people's beliefs.
Does anybody even think about Christopher Hitchens anymore? Like, come the fuck on, man.
Well, I've had a few students recently even who bring him up, and I'm definitely not a fan of Hitchens.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of a lot of things religions do, but Hitchens and Dawkins and those guys, they are as much a part of the problem as like...
They created the manosphere, man.
They absolutely did. Yeah. So you know, when people are critiquing and when people are getting off on making fun of others, and like that's how people like Wintrip come to power. That's
Absolutely.
how Trump comes to power.
Absolutely.
Because these people are disaffected when they have. Many of these people have real, legitimate concerns. Like in this book, these people have been in a Great Depression for 7 years at this point.
Exactly.
They are legitimately don't know what to do, and here is a man who gives them hope. It's false, it's nonsense, but it's hope, and and what people turn to when
his whole approach is like FDR didn't go far enough, didn't do enough for you guys. I'm gonna do even more.
Yeah,
and that's exactly Trump. That's exactly what Trump said.
And he actually says when in his acceptance speech of the presidency, Wintrip says like, now the real New Deal begins.
Exactly.
So that's what they do. They take the hyperbole, they manipulate people, and that's what we get. And we don't agree. I mean, I definitely don't. I know you don't agree with everything Sinclair Lewis is kind of putting forth.
No.
But I do think it is an excellent read. It's a cautionary tale. It's worth taking some of those ideas. He really, I mean, he kind of predicted the Second World War.
Yeah, he really did. I don't love the solution to like the totalitarian state being like go back the other main party candidate and like turn them into a like valorous hero.
And there is, I think what tells at the end is when Trowbridge is approached by an oil baron and he said, we're not taking your money anymore. You're not skimming off the tax. Basically, he says capitalism is going to be better.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's not. That's so like, yeah, you can say that when you're out of power. But then, and you've got like a rebellion that you're the head of, and you're like a fucking hero and shit like that. But if you get back into power and you become president, are you telling me that like the next president isn't gonna take oil money? Because I don't fucking believe you.
Yeah, no. Money in politics is a real problem.
Absolutely.
So, any final thoughts?
No, I think that was it. I got to take some shots at like centrists, and that's all I want to do, man. That's my pastime.
When we're talking off camera, that's all you do.
That's all I do. I fucking hate those guys, man. Fucking middle of the road bullshit.
So our next book.
Speaking of not being middle of the road, it's Black Empire. It's by George Schuyler, and it's basically like what if. It's a pulp fiction that was written in the 30s, basically the exact same era that we've just been talking about, but from a basically like Killmonger's perspective. It's like, what if Killmonger was, I don't know, fighting racism through world domination? And it's a pretty fun read. I'm a couple chapters into it already. And it's from the perspective of a guy that he like recruits a la The Shadow. Did you ever like read The Shadow?
I did read The Shadow.
One of the things that The Shadow does is whenever he saves someone's life, he says that they owe him that life and they have to be an agent for him. And he's doing the same thing. At the same time, I wonder if it's based off of that. I'm going to read up more on George Schuyler. But it's a fun pulpy read, and
Afrofuturism.
Afrofuturism.
This is our first Afrofuturism one.
Yeah, it is. It is, and it's actually a collection of two different serials that he had in black literary magazines from like the Harlem Renaissance, basically. And yeah, so far fun read. I think it'll be a little bit it'll be a nice counterpoint to this. Like, you know, it's another attempt at world domination. Wintrip was literally thinking about being the emperor of the world, you know, at the end of his presidency.
Wouldn't it be nice to be emperor of the world?
Wouldn't you like to be the king of Mexico?
Yeah, that's what he tells us. He tells this guy right before he deposes him. So,
sure. Yeah, but he's doing it through like through technology and like covert systems that are like infiltrating, you know, different official organizations. So, yeah, I think that might be the only way we can do this at this point. You know, gotta, you know, infiltrate the fucking systems that are oppressing us and subvert them.
First, you gotta know what they are.
That's right.
That's what being woke is. It's our final takeaway.
God, I don't know what is being woke at this point. I thought it was being aware of like the dangers around you, but that's back when Childish Gambino wrote that song, I think. You know.
Yeah. So, all right, we will get it up on the schedule, and we'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Have a fun one, guys.